call infrastructure will be manifest again in the digital space. So I think we need to call for, from a civil society point of view, there is a lot of work which needs to be done in terms of advocacy, in terms of sensitization, so that Kenyans are able to understand what is negative, what should not be supported, what should not be perpetuated. We expect the government on its part and the EMB, if it is running an election, to ensure that beyond the code of conduct, beyond the laws that they are putting in place, that there is action, that there is enforcement. So if you don't put in very hard and straight and tight regimes which we can be able to enforce, then the problem will persist. And I think the proportion of it will only increase over time. So I think I keep saying that from where I see it, it's a question of the concert of a number of actors, not just the civil society. Civil society will sensitize, will advocate, but the government must do its job. The EMB and EMBs, because it is not just the IEBC alone.
The register of political parties. We are parliament, it plays a role in terms of ensuring that that space is secured. You'll know the elections belong to the people. The people must be protected from harmful information which is coming through. So it is not enough to say, the easier way is to shut down internet. In a country where we depend a lot, even our businesses are depending on the internet, shutdown would be very catastrophic. So it's a question of what measures, and I like the direction that the Honorable Martha Karua has taken in terms of, can we have a special unit in place? The police always come up with a special unit to deal with elections. So we can also be able to come up with a special unit which can be able to deal with the problems that we are seeing within the digital space, and create a lot of awareness of civil society and other actors, sensitize the public to the extent that they can be able to make also decisions on their own and protect themselves from such harmful information that may be coming through. So it's a concert of all those, and the media, we've not talked about the media, but the media have an onerous task and responsibility to ensure that whatever is also being shared out, because some of it is associated with mainstream media themselves, is also propagated and perpetuated through mainstream media. They also do their part in addressing the problem that we have currently.
Leading the division, sorry.
So it will take a lot of digital sensitization, which has already been mentioned, because there's a sense of digital etiquette that's not taught anywhere. I think it's a space where everyone is navigating, and it's new for everyone, and the people who seem to get a grasp of it is the young people. So they're the ones who are making the rules as they go. But also, the fact that young people do not report, but they do not report because they've not been informed to report. Sometimes you see posts that you can see and tell that this thing is not right, it's not going the right direction, but people don't take that extra step to click on the little dots on the side or the tabs on the side, depending on the app you're on, to actually report the issue. And then I think that's also a gap that's missing, that young people can be at the forefront of this, so that when they see that sort of information, it's taken down or removed or censored as soon as possible without it being shared and spread. But another thing when it comes to monitoring is the fact that a lot of these large companies they're not in Africa. I mean, when you talk about the Facebooks, they have a few representatives within the offices in Africa. So Kenya office maybe has 3-4 people, and when we're talking about hate speech, it's not in English. You know, there are nicknames for people, you know, that, yeah, it's in our other languages, or Kiswahili, utafinywa, you know, like, so these terminologies, they're not in English. So because they're not in English, it's very hard for them to set up these monitoring mechanisms to be able to flag that this is a word that shouldn't be spreading and growing. And so there's a lot of work in that area that's needed to be able to identify what these terms are early, and, you know, say that these are terms that are being connected to people, and it's a dangerous trajectory, and people being able to now, Kenyans, it has to be Kenyans who are behind these platforms, who understand these spaces, to flag them. But also, another concern is young people not being able to differentiate the truth from a deep fake. The fact that there are now a lot of images and videos that are coming out, and they are photoshopped. I mean, it's videos that now it's visual, and it looks like someone is doing something and they are not. And then how do you tell, you know, youth to, you know, flag something that looks so real? And these are some of the things that is a concern for me, because especially as we transition, a lot of this information on how to create a deep fake is open source. So people are able to just go and collect this information and create deepfakes. There's no regulations as to how that can be used or whether it is dangerous or not. And that is going to be a problem in the future for young people. But also them being able to utilize their platforms for good. And I think I saw this one most recently, where, you know, a young lady was being trolled over the weekend, and people started to use their platforms to defend her and protect her, and, you know, ask people to tone down on the trolling and, you know, to leave her alone. If we see more of that, rather than people seeing this happening and letting it be, that's also an avenue that youth can be at the forefront. But also, as we transition from looking at mainstream media as a resource for information, because youth are sort of moving away from mainstream, and mainstream is trying to work really hard to go into digital, with their digital, to actually connect with the youth. They're going to have to find creative ways to still be able to grasp their attention, because they're competing with individuals who have now become media houses in themselves, and competing with individuals who now create news, and they are not really coming from a place of research and fact.
Thank you. As we approach the tail end, I'm going to request my panelists to respond to the next questions and give us their last thoughts as well, so that we can close the session on time. So now I'll start with you, Bob. You did talk about the code of conduct, the possibilities, but how would we be able to legitimize this code of conduct? How do we ensure that political parties, one, accept these, deem it as being legitimate, and abide by any decisions that would be made arising from the code of conduct? And as you do so, also just give us your last thoughts on this emerging space, the digital space, and what it means for the next elections as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll take a very short time as requested. Political parties' code of conduct is a very important tool that commits political parties to act in a certain manner, in a certain acceptable manner. Not only political parties, but also involving the party members, because members belong to political parties. Members belong to political parties where they are registered as members, and not to the Office of Registrar of Political Parties. So we require the representatives who are not just members, but party officials, to commit to this code of conduct, and to commit that they are going to adhere to the rules and all the statements stipulated in the code of conduct. My final statement is that we need to collaborate as institutions. If it is Office of the Registrar of Political Parties, we need to work closely with all the other involved stakeholders. In terms of securing the infrastructure, for example, we need to involve other government institutions that are involved in security. If it is mobile technology, we need to also integrate and collaborate with other telcos in the sectors to make sure that we have a secure environment for the elections. So we need to collaborate very well and make sure that whatever we are doing, we are not doing in isolation. We are involving political parties, we are involving IBC, we are involving civil societies, we are involving government security agencies and all the other agencies, because it would be very unfortunate if we repeated the same situations and the same mistakes that have gotten us into various situations and circumstances that we found ourselves in our previous elections.
Thank you. Honorable Karua, how do we hold leaders accountable to what they would sign up, and how do we use this space to enhance and strengthen public trust in the democratic space and democratic process, as you give your closing thoughts?
I think I've already alluded to enforcement being key, but we have to be very careful. Enforcement can equal censorship. It can give the opportunity to censor. Participation of the stakeholders is key to avoid that, so that whatever enforcement is there, whatever is agreed upon is in a participatory approach. And I've already given the option, thoughts on how that can be achieved by having an all-inclusive committee that cascades from the national level to the county to the polling station. And this can be enhanced. That's why this conversation is so important. And I would also like to say that we must see digital space as an equalizer in some ways. It enables swift and very wide communication at a very minimal cost. So if I can't hold a rally, I can hold it digitally. So it's really a space we must safeguard, and having a code of regulations and enforcement brought about in a participatory manner is key. And I'm also suggesting a fact checker group, just like we have ELO for monitoring the elections. How about either the media or civil society having a fact checker group? I saw in the American elections a fast, always fact checker. Even here we have fact checker. But in elections, the media houses may be overwhelmed. How about us thinking about a fact checker group that always keeps the public aware, and that will help us mitigate the dangers of deliberate harmful misinformation and hate speech. The question was asked, how do we legitimize the code of conduct? For me, participation in accordance with the Constitution equals legitimacy, not cosmetic participation, meaningful participation by the stakeholders. So we must take advantage of technology, not fear it, but we need to put safeguards. And finally, I want to say this. When we are securing the digital space, it can be a plus also for enhancing the transparency of the entire process of elections and of the results. I want to end with something I have not discussed. How about enhancing the electronic transmission by allowing agents in a polling station who have smartphones, and there will be many, to actually take WhatsApp images of the results once they are signed? That would ensure that the results are not manipulated. It will have wide circulation, therefore securing the transparency. That's just one little bit as food for thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Mule, as you give your closing thoughts, there's one group of people that we have not spoken about, and that is the citizens, because they are not scot-free from this conversation. What do they need to do, and how do we build trust as you close? Yeah.
Well,
in 2 minutes.
Well, for citizens, it's a question of awareness creation, basically, because citizens are very wise in their own ways. If we have enough awareness creation, they are able to choose between the things which ought to work for them and the ones which don't work for them. It's a question of telling people this is where we are. I think the digital space and the threats which are coming from it may constitute the biggest problem for the coming elections, and we need to protect the people when it comes to this particular process. So awareness, voter education, citizen and civic education around that space will do wonders.
Nerima, last words to young people.
To name and shame. We can see the individuals who are doing these things, not to sit quiet about it and watching it happen. If one is shamed, then it will make the others shy off.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. And before we close, any additional thoughts or questions from the floor? Make it quick and let us know who your questions are directed to so that we can respond. And I'm not sure if Alphonse is still here on the issue of, so I thought you could also give a quick remark on this fact-checking conversation that we're having and what the media needs to do, and which I know you're already doing. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Kathy from Code for Africa. We are a fact-checking organization, and we also do verification. So Nerima, we are there. And I'd like to just appreciate Honorable Karua's thoughts. I think we are there. We are doing what we need to do. And my question actually comes to you, being experienced in this place. Do you think political actors should continue being allowed to run their own unchecked newsrooms, because they are propagating a lot of misinformation? That's where we get our bread and butter. But should that be allowed to continue, or do you think there should be legislation barring them from running their newsrooms to curb misinformation?
I think that we must allow people to run their own sort of shadow media houses, but the regulations should cover that so that you take responsibility for anything that is harmful coming from your station. And that's why I was talking of a participatory approach, because if we have the political players in a group self-regulating but also subject to the law, therefore there is enforcement outside the self-regulation, it becomes much, much better, because it will be 10 political parties against one or two who are saying they didn't do it, and the others are saying this is what you've been doing to us. So we sort of give the regulator the cover against that. You are just being unfair to one political party. It depoliticizes. It gives the political players the leverage to regulate themselves. And it's the same for every other electoral malfeasance.
Thank you. Any other question? Please indicate your question and who you're. Okay. If you don't have a question, then Alphonse. Not sure if there's any online comments.
Yes, just a quick, my moderator here, we're coming up for the next session.
Okay, awesome.
And the first question that she had prepared for my session is the question that has been raised about what we are doing. So she just showed me, and I think we can do justice to that by getting on to the next session to respond to the question.
Okay,
Thank
awesome. I guess that's also my cue to close this session, but also just tells you how well thought out this conversation is, moving on to the next. And so with those few remarks, I would want to thank everybody for participating in this session. My very able panelists, Honorable Karua, Bob from ORPP, Nerima Wako Siasa Place, and Mule from ILOG for the very engaging conversation. Thank you, Kofi Annan Foundation and CMD for putting this together. To all of you who have participated and those who have participated online, whether through the virtual session and also following the conversation on Twitter and other social media platforms, we thank you, and we request that you stay on for the next panel, as you've had, fact-checking and relevant conversation happening shortly after this. So thank you very much, and God bless you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, panel. Thank you, Caroline. We have the last session for the day coming up on the best practices and lessons learned on countering disinformation and misinformation. Quite a packed one. Alphonse Chiundu from Africa Check, Dennis Omondi from NDI, and I think we have two other panelists that are joining us online, and they are already here with us. So quickly over to you, Catherine. Please take it down. Thank you.
Which we were just realized when we were talking with Ashiundu that it's something that we've been grappling with, and I'm so happy today that it's not us alone who've been thinking about these issues, but actually a lot of us who are thinking about these issues. And this is the whole thing about disinformation, misinformation around elections. I know you've all already had how many of us in terms of how many Kenyans actually are getting or have had access to information or regularly get access to information. According to Portland, in the last study that they did, they showed it was about 90%. Now that could be higher because obviously a lot more of us have become more connected and we've got better phones, not the usual small phones, but actually getting smartphones, they're becoming cheaper. So that means the number of people who are actually accessing or receiving or engaging or encountering misinformation is on the rise. I also know quite a number of you may have looked, may have had access to, and if you haven't, please go and look at the article that my friend Odanga did. He's a Mozilla fellow. And they actually looked at the nature of the misinformation that is coming through that we're encountering as Kenyans. And the most interesting thing, which I thought I shouldn't really be surprised, is that there are people being paid to spread misinformation. There are people on the payroll of politicians or corporates or you name it, anybody who wants to put out some information out there and they want a lot of us to see or to engage with for whatever reasons, whether most of them nefarious reasons, and actually creating a lot of, making you feel really bad. They said there's a lot of that happening. Now, we haven't even gotten to, I know in Kenya we campaign from one election to the next one. We never stopped campaigning. I don't think we've stopped campaigning since 2017. But in the lead up, in the last few months, between, I think from the handshake, I bet. Let's talk about the handshake, which was in 2018, which is just a year after the 2017 election. We've been on high drive. We've been campaigning. Everybody has been, and whether it's BBI or whatever the issue is, we've been on a campaign drive, and that is only getting more and more intense as we head towards the elections next year. And this is not a problem only in Kenya, because I can tell you, Uganda, they face the same nonsense. Nigeria, the same thing. In Brazil, I think theirs is on a higher level, if not more intense than ours. And that's the reason why we're having this particular panel. We want to understand what can be done. In Kenya, the government has said, oh, it's illegal if they've legislated against the spread of misinformation. But how effective is that? And like Martha Karua said in the previous session, legislation sometimes can also lead to the chilling effect where people seem or are censored, or voices that are not seen to be on the right side of whatever it is might be censored. So what interventions have been done in different countries? How is the state of misinformation, disinformation, especially around elections? How is it in other countries, and what has been done? Today we have a very, very good panel. I have to say, I'll be listening, and if I ask too many questions, I beg your pardon, but I'm really, really interested. We have with us today here in this room, we have Dennis, who is with the NDI. I know Dennis, I met Dennis today, but I've read of him. And we also have Alphonse Ashiundu, who is with Africa Check. He's the Africa editor for Africa Check. Okay. Africa.
Kenya editor.
Kenya editor. Oh, sorry. I keep on calling you the Africa editor because I think you're bigger than Kenya. Anyway, he's the Kenya editor for Africa. And online we have, I will try not to mispronounce his name. We have, let me read about him because he's got a very interesting whatever. His name is Roberto Cadilla. I hope I've not mispronounced it. He's the executive director of the Electoral Training and Civic Education, the National Electoral Institute of Mexico. And he's the head of the directorate where he leads the implementation and of strategy for the integration of polling stations as well as the electoral training project, essentially civic education for polling station officials. He's also, and this is why I'm really, really excited he's on the panel, he played a key role in an initiative which was really successful in countering election misinformation and disinformation in Mexico. It was known as Verificado, and it was really so successful, and it's a beautiful collaboration. I call it beautiful because in my head I imagine, oh, why can't we do this? We should be able to do this. And the reason we're having him here today, he may not be here with us physically, but he's with us virtually, is to tell us how did they do it, how did it work, why did it work, and why did it not work in some aspects, if there are any aspects it did work. And then of course we have also Lisa Rappel. She's a specialist on global social media and disinformation at the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, where she coordinates and leads the organization's portfolio on information integrity and counter disinformation. So welcome, all the ones who are watching us virtually and the ones who are here, please feel free to ask the questions as and when we're done. We're going to have a conversation first. I'll just field a few questions to our panelists and then we can have a discussion. The panelists, please feel free to interject if you do feel there's something you want to add to somebody's statement or somebody's comment. So it's not really like we're going to do a very formal thing, but let's have a conversation. And I think it helps when we are all kind of engaged in each other's contributions. I will start with Lisa though. And the obvious reason is because I wanted you to kind of set the stage for us and tell us the state of misinformation, disinformation around the world, and if you have any examples about this problem in Africa. It doesn't have to be Kenya, but if you can talk about that. And then also maybe you can tell us what types of programs or actions have been used by election management organizations like IABC or any others like the Mexican one to deal with this problem. Lisa.
Along with our partners IRI and NDI, engaged in a 2-year research effort to collect and aggregate different interventions from around the world. And we compiled them into an online guidebook called counteringdisinformation.org. And I just wanted to start the global perspective, almost with a perspective of hope in some ways, because you can start to see all of the different things that are being tried. The guide's organized into 9 thematic chapters. So you can see what are all sorts of civil society interventions, what are election monitors doing, what are political parties doing, and Catherine asked specifically about some approaches from election management bodies like the IABC. And this has a whole chapter in the guidebook as well. So all of these chapters, when you enter them, have a quick overview that tells you everything that's in the chapter, but it's designed to navigate you directly to the information that you're most interested in. So for example, if you want to find out about codes of conduct, which I know is a topic in particular on the agenda this morning, there's actually a section where you can look at global comparative examples of codes of conduct around online conduct for political contestants. So when we look at what election management bodies are doing, and I'm very excited that Roberto is on this panel because INE and Mexico are different areas of responsibility and also examples of different peer-to-peer exchange. So there's a lot more that I could cover in the guidebook. I do want to note that the guidebook also allows you to look at interventions. So someone would just say, I want to do media literacy. What are some examples around media literacy? And you can see all of these different examples to gain inspiration, to potentially find different partners to reach out to. And then you can also search online. And I will say,
Lisa, Lisa, just a quick question, Lisa. I mean, are actually applying this, and what has worked and what hasn't worked. Like you mentioned, the database is there and all these interventions are there. How much of what you've studied or how much of the content that you've collected actually may be reflective of what has happened within the continent? And what can we learn from it, or what can we take away from what you found out and what you're doing? Because I love the fact that you actually have the terms when it comes to media literacy and all the rest. But what can we take away, like at the end of this conversation, what can we take away from these contributions? And maybe you can respond to that before I go to Dennis. Because I want him to set the scene for us, because I know he's been working within the election space for the longest time. So maybe you can kind of tell us what is available in terms of what can we go in and start using at the moment, and what can we learn from what others have done. Thank you.
Focusing on the Kenya example to know what might be most useful. Some really strong examples from the continent. Nigeria's Strategic Communication and Communication Department are covered in the guidebook to some degree, or to some significant degree. So I don't want to get us too off track. I'd love to learn and have the Kenya experts in the room focus us, and perhaps hop back if that makes the most sense, Catherine.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Lisa. I will come back to you. I know we can come back to you. I know we can continue because I'm really interested in that. Interesting, and I can assure you we are going to start looking at it. I can assure you we are going to start looking at it. Dennis, maybe you can just kind of a little bit about NDI and what exactly you're looking to be doing, especially when it comes to misinformation and misinformation around the elections. I know you've been working in that space, so maybe you can tell us what are some of the initiatives that you think exist in Kenya, and how are they working, or what do we need to do to be able to make it be responsive to the challenges that we're already seeing with the misinformation around the elections, not just plus everything else.
Thank you. Let me start by saying, I'm the country director for NDI Kenya. I think if you look at the environment where elections are held, democratic elections, I like to reduce them to sort of like 3 pillars that are very essential for a democratic process. The first one is that there must be competition in an election, and that is involving political parties, that is involving politicians, and all those participating. If you go for an election without a competition, you'll be wondering whether you're going for a competition. The second aspect that I think is very important for a democratic election are, confidence in the institutions that are, conducting or being involved in the process of elections. And finally, I think it is very necessary that we create an environment that amplifies informed participation, whether it's with the politicians, whether it is with the parties, whether it is with the institutions that are involved in elections, or citizens. And there you meet this construct we are calling disinformation. Essentially, what we have seen, and I think if there was no pillar in terms of disinformation where we see very deliberate attempt and strategic deployment of disinformation, I think that for me is really the problem. You see deliberate and very strategic deployment of disinformation. And all these efforts are targeted at the pillars that we have talked about. They are either targeted at, dealing with the competition so that the competition there is no level playing ground for the competition. They are targeted at institutions that are involved in the electoral process. They are targeted at creating or distorting, information to citizens, politicians, political parties, so that the electoral environment is not be the concern that we see in societies with the advent of the new media. More so because of how much the penetration is and how much accessible this medium or channels have become. And that is really worrying to electoral processes, especially given that electoral processes need to mirror, or the outcome needs to reflect the will or the desires or preferences of citizens. Now, if you look at, in the first instance, disinformation, I think whether we are talking about false information, whether we are talking about exaggerated information, whether we are talking about contradictory information, I think what is very important that we pick that all this, as long as it is deliberate, deliberately deployed to cause, an unintended outcome by those people who are spreading it. That's exactly where, for me, the joint is, and then we have to cut it. Now, if we come to the Kenyan society, I think if you look at our elections, I tell people that, this information has always been there. It's just the medium. And I think those people who have been in Kenya long enough know exactly how we used to speak about the KANU propaganda, where a candidate will die at night, and so before the day is, and they are disappeared, and so who votes for a dead candidate? And those were real campaigns and disinformation. The only thing is that platforms were not as accessible as today. And now, because we are having mediums and platforms that are accessible, I think across the globe, there are serious concerns in terms of the impact of such processes, such interventions, such actions in terms of the outcome, and whether the outcome actually mirrors the preference of citizens, or that they are a cohort or a group of people who are actually designing electoral outcomes. And we have seen, if you look at even Kenya here, I think we have talked about Cambridge Analytica and what that meant for the 2013 elections. I think we forwarded it to 2017 election, and people have always argued in literature what their role has been. And of course, this is not to mention now what I heard, I think, Mule talk about here, where this thing has evolved. Politicians are now having hired media experts, so to say, quote unquote, or what I call the social media warriors, or keyboard warriors, who are doing everything possible in terms of misguiding, misleading, misreporting, whatever you want to put there in terms of information distortion. And I think this is becoming a concern. Now, if you look at some of the electoral laws, I had Martha Karua here talk about the codes of conduct. And I think some of these codes of conduct, those who are involved in the process, were actually intended to try and create. I think the question that we need to ask now is whether the political party's code of conduct, whether the elections code of conduct has come to realize some of these things that were intended. And my answer would be that I think we need to reflect on those code of conducts, because I think in 2012, when we were writing those codes of conduct, disinformation, misinformation, malinformation weren't really topical at that point. And I think we have to be, conscious now that, the rate of access to technology, these mediums has really grown, and so we need to reflect. Yeah.
There's a whole thing about legislating against and coming up with code of conducts and all the rest. But like you mentioned, in the old days, candidates is said to die, then it's election day, everybody believes the man has died, so who are you going to vote for? But that was, how can we in this time and space, especially like with what you're talking about in terms of the accessibility of the different platforms, being able to talk to 1 million people at one time. Do you see anything within the Kenyan space that can help us in any form? Is there any initiative that can help us counter this disinformation? Is there anything that exists? And if it doesn't, or if it does, what is it? How does it look like?
Yeah, I think there are a number of attempts to, first, there is recognition that disinformation is a problem for elections in Kenya. And I think for me that's a good starting point. So that even having this conversation, you're talking about the electoral management body, you're talking about the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties, you're talking with parties, there is recognition that this is a problem. The second aspect is, I have seen coalitions of civil society organizations, Design for Democracy coalitions, are actually coming up in the sector. Mule was here, he's talked about the election monitoring efforts, and we have talked, in terms of the election monitoring effort, the new area that is actually coming up is the media monitoring, which is really targeting the traditional media, is targeting the modern media, and perhaps just monitoring and seeing exactly the challenges that are really coming up. I think the big issue for me is the engagement with the platforms, the social media platforms, and how varied the language, which I think one of the panelists alluded to, developing lexicons that are actually country-specific. And even country, even here, if you still develop lexicons and use Swahili, it's not really going to work. You still need to get it down to Kikamba, you need to get it down. And I think it's a challenge. It's a true challenge that all of us have to be, cognizant about and actually try to do something. And I like what Martha Karua stated here. And it's amazing, Martha Karua always has a very different perspective than political class. I can tell you what she said here is not what many politicians would say, because she wants to be accountable to an extent, and that's really what we need. I think we have to be very deliberate in terms of creating self-regulation among the political class and among the political parties. And then decentralize that self-regulation so that it reaches where then those the uses of those terminologies are equally shared among the populace at that level. Because that's one of the challenges. With IRI, I think, and IFS, I think we ran, talking about lexicons and how challenging it has been for the platforms in terms of even trying to standardize content takedowns, because these languages are not standardized.
Okay, I think for me the challenge, the media monitoring and all the rest is fantastic, but one of the things which has come to bear and which I think all the panelists in the previous panel and even you have alluded to is the fact that people are sharing this information because they don't know any better. And the structures that need to be helping us to kind of counter that information do not exist. From what you're saying, we are at the beginning of acknowledging it is a problem and trying to put in place structures that can help us now counter it. Maybe we can hear from Alphonse, because he's been working in I call it the fact-checking, front line of fact-checking, trying to get us to be media literate, at least be literate when it comes to understanding what it is what you're consuming on the media. And you've been at it for the last 2, 3, 5 years now, almost 5 years. And what do you think, what in your opinion do you think we can do, not only as fact, because the problem is you have fact checkers here, then you have NDI here, and you have ELOG over there. And my thing is all the stuff that all of us are doing in our own different spaces are all trying to address one problem. What do you think fact-checking initiatives like Africa Check can contribute to what he's talking about, which is not other than just media monitoring, and what Lisa has alluded to, and what I hope Roberto will tell us about, which is how can we all come together to do this kind of countermeasure to deal with this information and misinformation around elections? Because I know you're going to, so for starters, just tell us, when it comes to fact-checking elections, specifically, let's talk about fact-checking elections because the rest of it is humongously huge. But let's look at fact-checking. What are some of those challenges and what do you think we can do as fact-checking initiatives to contribute to this changing the ecosystem so that we stop having this madness of 110 warriors at the keyboard and only one Ashiundu to try and counter that madness they are producing?
Thank you very much for raising that. It's exactly what we have been working on. The first time we got into fact-checking the Kenyan elections was in 2017. And from that, we picked up lessons because it was the first time, I think, in January of that year when we saw the first fake front page in Kenya. And nowadays, fake fabricated front pages are something that keep going around every year. It was also during that election that for the first time we saw faked videos or manipulated or doctored videos of foreign media houses. So it was the BBC and CNN. But the sophistication in that is that the videos were not being posted on Facebook. They were being circulated in WhatsApp groups that had diplomats in them. They were not being circulated everywhere. So it was shaping opinion outside places where fact checkers are. The third thing I think we saw was the way the search algorithm was hijacked, so that if you searched the name Raila Odinga, you would see all the negative stories that have ever been written about him. But if you search the name Uhuru Kenyatta, you will see everything he has done to make the economy better. So that rigging, it's a rigging of the search algorithm, and I would say buying AdWords and using them in a different way on Google. Those were some of the things that we are seeing. Now, what did we do then, and will it work now? So back then we spoke, for example, the rigging of the search algorithm, it's something we spoke about. And we spoke about it at different fora. And I remember when it was raised in the National Elections Conference at the KICC, the following day, people from Google were there. And the following day, they corrected that anomaly immediately. So that was good. What we have learned is that we need to collaborate. Our strength is in fact-checking, but we all know facts are sometimes very stiff. They can be boring. Politicians know that for them to campaign, they have to tell a good story. They have to appeal to our emotion. So when you are competing with facts, we are likely to come second. So we have to think about a way to distribute fact checks in a way that it emotionally appeals to the people who are reading it. We are not trying to misinform them, but we are giving them information in a way that they can chew, in a way that they can understand. The other thing we've been doing since then with Google and with the Meta, previously Facebook, is that we are emphasizing on the power of using their technology. So with right now, we are in the process of developing an artificial intelligence tool that then helps us pick claims as they are made. So if somebody makes a claim that we can check and it's circulating online, whether it's been re-reported by the media houses, the AI picks them up and pops them. So every morning we check the queue of what has come, and it's getting better by the day. So we have this many claims, and then we just pick a few to check. And lastly, it's with Meta. In 2017, the struggle was, you see something false, it's manifestly false on Facebook. You really want it removed because it's misleading a lot of people, it's being shared a lot, and you want it off the platform. But then there is a question where you have to think, would I be censoring free speech if I got it down? And Meta took the position that you guys, we are not in the business of taking it down. The best they can do then was they would label it as either false or misleading or all that, and inform people. So a lot of that misinformation would circulate. And since then, Meta made a decision where they said we do not fact-check politicians on the platform. So if a politician defined as a sitting politician or a political candidate makes a false claim on Facebook, it's off limits to fact-checkers on the platform. But we can check it on our platforms and then inform people that it is false. So going forward, I think the best we can do is to step up our collaboration. And this time, it's not just about fact-checkers collaborating on, say, distribution of fact-checks or doing the fact-checks themselves, but it's also about collaborating on the media literacy initiatives that we are doing. So people would ask, and I've had a lot of people since morning here, discussing and agonizing about, for example, things like deepfakes. So algorithms and tools and software is becoming more sophisticated. It becomes difficult to determine what is true and what is not. But we are the people. So there are basic critical questions that we need to ask. So if you see something online, we usually tell people, you just ask 3 questions. How do I know that this is true? can I get independent proof on my own that it's actually true? And then before they share, they have to reflect on it. Do they really have to share it if they don't have proof? So those three lessons, every time we go around doing the media literacy, we tell people, if you don't get anything out of this, we tell people, if you don't get anything out of this, those questions, because just everything remember to ask those questions. And so you have to be very, very careful on that. Now, 2022 is around the corner. The dog whistling that has been mentioned here, where somebody, we have developed phrases where people make claims. For example, if somebody says that Mount Kenya has 8 million votes, now, does it mean Mount Kenya region? And how do you define that? So politicians have gotten smarter. They know, as fact checkers, what we look for are statements of facts. So they decide to give us phrases or statements which are either vague or can be interpreted in multiple ways, and in which, if they make a claim, then they can wiggle out of it by saying no, we say Mount Kenya and it includes this. But everyone in this room and outside and everyone in Kenya knows the moment somebody mentions Mount Kenya, it's code for community. So that is those are things that as fact checkers we have to grapple with. And lastly, it's disrupting the disinformation network. It's not fact checking per se, but there are all these Odanga and Mozilla did, identifying the paid people who are pushing hashtags and then trying to get Twitter to knock those accounts off. That is something that fact checkers have to actively get involved in, because it's one of the ways in which we can stop the pollution of the information ecosystem. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Alphonse. I mean, from the discussion we've had so far, it seems to me everybody here has a role. Dennis and his organization has a huge role in the sense that it's not only the media monitoring, but actually trying to kind of bring all these different groups together. And we want to hear from Roberto, because Roberto was a key player in putting together what you mentioned earlier, which is essentially a collaborative effort to fight disinformation during the elections in 2018. Roberto, I put a lot of faith in Verificado, because once I saw what it was doing in 2018, I was like, okay, our election is just over. Of course, planning to do it, coming into 2022, we never did anything. Maybe you can give our audience a quick brief about how you brought it together, how it came together. What role IEBC, call your IEBC, not IEBC, your election body. How did you bring in people like Dennis, the IRIs, the NDI? How did you bring in the media? How did you bring in civil society? Just tell us how you put it all together and the impact that this has had since you put it together. Thank you. Welcome, Roberto. Welcome, Roberto.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I try to make it quickly because I know the importance of this space. And let me try to start with this right now. You see my presentation? Yeah. Okay, right. Thank you very much. I want to start with this image. This image was spread in the social media during the 2018 Mexican election, causing great confusion regarding the security and political violence surrounding the election. Electoral processes all around the world are fertile soil to disseminate fake news and misinformation. As turns out, this image was taken from Wikipedia to provoke uncertainty and fear during the election day. This kind of disruption and spread of fake news can happen all around the world, undermining the trust in democratic institutions, as Dennis says, increasing social distrust and reducing electoral integrity, raising the potential for instability and or violence. This is very important to say. This and misinformation, just like this example, mind the people's autonomy to make decisions, and whether it is intentional or not, the spreading of this kind of inaccurate or false information prevents citizens from being able to make decisions based on certain or reliable information. This kind of risk or threats have become a component in the electoral context that is here to stay. Hence, electoral institutions must address these issues systematically and methodically. In Mexico, we're taking two theoretical reference to create an efficient approach to counter misinformation in the electoral context. The importance of public administration's communication relies on the fact that it cannot resemble communication between persons. Instead, it resides in the institution's identity with all the means it has to communicate. On the other hand, the social influences on decisions referring to social media scopes lead to information cascades, no one to reputation cascades referring to authority or personality of the person that communicates certain information, such as the president or any other politician or head of governmental institution, and famous people too. On the right side, if we anticipate the disqualifications, these cascades can be reverted using public pedagogy. In order to address this issue, we used an institutional model of integral communication with two elements. First, dissemination campaigns with a public pedagogy approach that are related with a preventive component, and social media actions related with a corrective component in order to deny false information immediately with reliable data and evidence. The promise of direction is crucial. As you know, the speed in the spread of social media, it's very fast. On the other hand, the evidence that supports the information being conveyed, it's absolutely necessary to proper functioning of this model. For example, Mexico as general policy, we consider no more than 5 minutes to respond that identifies disinformation cases. The goal of this strategy is to create an explanation of relevant actions and activities surrounding elections. I want to present this model very quickly. You can see my screen right now. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Thank you very much. The characteristic of this model should be transversality, immediacy, and spread of information through the same platforms, support by evidence. I think Alphonse says the relevance of Twitter, Facebook, and other platforms it's crucial in this model functioning. Operation of Certeza 2021, Certeza 2021, it was an initiative to counter the misinformation in Mexico. Consisted in 5 key processes. The first one was listening. As a first step, it was necessary to identify conversations in social media using keywords as tracking criteria with a certain negative connotation towards the election that could affect the electoral processes. The human and technological surveillance equipment was responsible for monitoring diverse sources of information, either in social media or through INE's internal systems, which report on the status of the elections on election day. Once a post or tweet was identified under the tracking criteria, it was uploaded to the monitoring system, a case was generated, and it was transferred to the analysis center. The second one was the data analysis. This process would be carried out by the multidisciplinary analysis team, and it consisted on passing report information through the surveillance system in order to determine its relevance and its origin. And if it's deemed important, a case would be appointed for its resolution to the field operators or to the analysis team itself. This multidisciplinary team was integrated by the highest ranking officers for immediate decision making. A third one was verification to confirm or debunk situations exposed in social media. It was necessary to conduct a verification process of the information gathered during the listening stage. This process consisted on proving the state of the reported situation either through the field operator or directly with the analysis team, depending who. To the media. Once the listening process resulted in a case, information analysis was developed, the evidence was verified and integrated, and the report of occurrences had been confirmed or debunked. A digital media product was generated. This product was channeled through allies for verified information sharing. Twitter, Facebook, Google, or Verificado. Verificado was a private initiative integrated by important journalists and social media influencers in this journalist context. Likewise, were spokespersons who shared certain information in response to relevant situations. As a final thought, it's important to consider there is still a theoretical basis or generate a unique model to fight misinformation. However, there are experiments such as the Mexican, in which functional model must contain at least this described process and elements. I think no matter is the size or complexity of the electoral processes, there must be a component within this process designed to fight this and misinformation.
I'm curious.
Finally,
Roberto.
Roberto. I mean, I'm very curious because when you are explaining all the different stages.
The first thing that came to my head is, how did you get all these diverse interests all coming at the elections from different places? How did you get them to sit at the same table and agree to share information and agree to work together? I mean, I'm seeing a scenario where El Tiempo,
scenario
the biggest
where
newspaper, or
El
Globo
Tiempo,
might say, I
the
don't
biggest
want to
newspaper,
work with the
or
other one
Globo
because
might
we are
say, I don't
rivals.
want to work with
Why
the
should
other
we
one because we are
collaborate?
rivals.
How did you
Why should we
address those
collaborate? How did you
concerns?
address those
I'm
concerns?
using
How
NDI
would-
as an example, but how do you get
I'm
civil
using NDI as an
society
example, but how
to
do you get
engage-
civil
how did you get civil
society
society
to
to
engage? How
with,
did you get civil society
journalists?
to
How did you
engage
get
with
journalists to
journalists? How
collaborate
did you
with
get
each other, with
journalists
civil
to
society? How did you
collaborate
get
with each
the
other, with civil
election
society? How did you get
body
the
organization
election
to have
management
faith
body
and trust in the
organization to
journalists? How did you
have
get
faith
all
and
these
trust
diverse
in the
groups
journalists?
together?
How did you get
Because
all
they
these
all
diverse
have,
groups
I would imagine
together?
they all had
Because they all have, I would
reasons why
imagine
they
they all had
shouldn't work
different
together. How did you break
reasons
down
why they
those
shouldn't
walls?
work together.
What
How
was
did you
the
break down
magic
those
word,
walls?
as it were?
What was the magic word, as it were?
Well, I think, Catherine, I stop sharing. Thank you. I think the idea for protect democracy and make stronger democratic context. It's a common for all of us, and no matter what the role is that you play in the country, in the society, the democratic system is important for all of us. I think create consciousness about this is very important and is the key to engage all these important actors. There are actors very necessary to take control. For example, the electoral authorities produce the information, but we can't disseminate efficiently. Is that we need this kind of initiative like Verificado or Africa Check, for example, who have these networks for disseminate this information. I think the idea of preserve the democracy context is the most powerful tool for engage of all of these important players in the electoral process.
Okay. Thank you very much, Roberto. I'm going to turn back to Lisa, and I'll also ask Dennis the same question.
I know you all understand about Verificado and how it was structured and how they all came together. Is Verificado, for example, an initiative that could be a response we could adopt for dealing with misinformation
and disinformation in Kenya?
And for you,
the same thing.
Lisa, what are some of the research? What are some of the tools, as it were, or whatever you want to call them, that we could take from your organization, where you've seen that countries can to kind of come up with this kind of
intervention measures that really have an impact. Because I think everybody is in agreement that Verificado really did have an impact on the misinformation ecosystem, and I don't think they'll ever go back to not working together.
Maybe you could
start with you, Lisa, maybe just a short one, and then you can pick it up, Dennis, because I just want us to start thinking, what can we do at the end of this? What practical steps can we all kind of present to our audiences so that we can set their minds thinking and their brains kind of chiming and thinking, yeah, we're going to do this. Thank you. Lisa, and then
Catherine. So a thought that was coming to me during the conversation today, certainly related to Verificado, is it's easy when we think about the challenges of misinformation and disinformation to focus on sort of reactive approaches that are attempts to remove content once it's already been posted or mitigate the effects of misinformation and disinformation once it's already in circulation. But there's an equally important component of this, which is the effective proactive communication prior to the specific incidents of misinformation and disinformation that, for example, on the part of the IABC or an election management body is about sort of building transparency prior to the election, building trust prior to the election, anticipating narratives that might emerge so that you can start to have, like that communication starts before the specific incidents of misinformation and disinformation. And there's a great quote I've heard from Dr. Cordova, the head of the Mexican Electoral Institute, about INE's approach, saying not just fighting bad information with reactive approaches, but fighting bad information with more information. So I think that when it comes to collaborative approaches like Verificado, the piece that's really interesting is not just the identification of the problematic information, but also what is the strategic communication plan in practice? How are these institutes sharing information, amplifying information, and how can you start to build a coalition of more and more actors that are pushing out good information, not just reactively, but also proactively? And on the reactive side, though, I'd also like to highlight approaches that don't just focus on the issue of content or individual pieces of content. So oftentimes fact-checking or content removal referrals, incredibly important, can focus on counteracting specific pieces of misinformation or disinformation. But oftentimes it's a matter of scale and this drip, 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 where any individual piece of content might not be the disaster, but it's in the collective. So looking at interventions, for example, the election management body in Brazil had a memorandum of understanding with WhatsApp that allowed them to have a public reporting channel so that individuals or other entities could report instances of bulk forwarding of WhatsApp messages that were a clear violation of the terms of service of WhatsApp. So it wasn't saying, oh, this is problematic content on the platform, which is really hard to define, as we all know, but it's saying this is a behavior. Bulk forwarding is a behavior that is a violation of WhatsApp's terms of service. The TSE in Brazil negotiated a direct line with WhatsApp so they could forward those complaints and have WhatsApp take action on them more expeditiously. So that's one concrete example of focusing on the behaviors. The same, and I'll keep this quick, but when we talk about, I hear you reference these keyboard warriors, this pay-for-play misinformation, disinformation, which is a global trend we're certainly seeing. But when we focus on, if we look at each individual piece of content these keyboard warriors are producing, we're not going to get anywhere. The volume is huge. But the behavior that they're engaging in, this coordinated, inauthentic behavior, is a violation of platform terms of services. I will say the platforms have frequently been slow to take action on removing these networks of behaviors, but that violation of a behavior versus an individual piece of content can be a way to avoid some of the concerns around freedom of expression, which are very real, and also start to look at this problem at scale as opposed to individual pieces of content. So certainly there are, like the Mozilla Fellow you mentioned, and other efforts looking at different platforms to identify these behaviors. There's best practices there to share globally that gets very technical, but is certainly possible to do. And also, if recognizing codes of conduct that are voluntary have minimal impact, but if we think about baking into those codes of conduct, not just saying, don't share misinformation and disinformation, but starting to think about what are the behaviors that we might deem to be beyond the realms of ethical campaigning, that we would start to include those behaviors in the codes of conduct, not just prohibitions against particular pieces of content. And I'll pause there and then pass to Dennis.
Thanks, Lisa. Coming to you, Dennis, I mean, she's mentioned something which I thought was quite useful in the sense that
we know the social media platforms are not likely to listen to Catherine Gicheru or Dennis, even if you're NDI. But they might, I mean, the whole thing where she's talking about like Verificado, even getting a whole mess of organizations coming together to demand certain action to be taken by social platforms. And at the same time, working on what she's mentioned about, instead of going at individual warriors, keyboard warriors, we actually kind of find ways of getting them thrown off these platforms. How do you see, if, and I'm saying a big if, not because it's not going to happen, but what would you say as NDI when it comes to responding or setting up an initiative where all of us differently, the Africa Checks of the world, the ELOGs of the world, the NDIs, coming together as a collaboration? Because I think there is a power to that kind of collaborative initiative to counter a lot of this. We are power in numbers, but we are very weak individually, and Roberto clearly pointed that out. And how would it look like in Kenya if we were to go ahead? If we were to go ahead, yeah.
Thank you, Catherine. I think I come from the school of thought that, you know, the deployment of disinformation actually predates the absence of facts. If we actually had facts everywhere, then disinformation will actually be the one trying to fight for the space. Now, we know where we're coming from, and I'd like to start even from legislation. Like in this country, we have enacted Access to Information Act, yet we cannot have the information and facts out there. So we then have to be always reactive. And I think I want to dovetail where Lisa, you know, what she spoke about, because it's very interesting. We have to look at this thing from the two sides. Do we want to be proactive? Do we want to be reactive? Either side has different ways of us looking at it. And I think working with all institutions, whether the electoral management body, whether the civil society, whether the tech teams, I think we have to push information and facts out there so that at the first instance citizens have facts. So when disinformation comes, then they are actually trying to weigh the disinformation against facts. And that then we are ahead. But unfortunately, that citizens tend to get disinformation before the facts. So we always are doing a catch-up game. And I think we have to, therefore, all interventions that we engage in, whether we are talking with institutions of governance, institutions involved in elections, civil society organizations in election monitoring, the tech organizations in terms of trying to do fact checks. How do we then get to be proactive with information? How do we require of these institutions charged with the duty to provide information to citizens to actually do so? Because it is at that point then that we are actually going to be having a solution that perhaps is grounded. But let me say this.
I was just going to ask, okay, being proactive. You have information, I have information. All of us have different kinds of information, but I will not be heard when I'm alone. Do you think it's the possibility of us working together to be able to amplify what all of us are doing? Because you're all trying to put out information, good information, put out the facts. Africa Check is doing, journalists, civil society, everybody is trying to do this in their own different corners. And taking the argument of being proactive is much better, because then you give people more information against which they can gauge the misinformation they are getting, the disinformation they can weigh. Is there a way maybe, or is it a possibility that we can actually then have a kind of collaborative working initiative? Because I agree with you, I think it's better to inoculate than to wait for me to cure somebody. Inoculate me against misinformation, at least I know I'm covered. So being the fact it could have been seen to be reactive, although I think for me for us it would be an kind of proactive situation. So maybe you can speak to that and then let us know how would that look like. If you were to paint a picture, how would it look like?
No, certainly, and I think, let me just clarify that I think what Verificado did is amazing. And I think it's an effort that people who are in the sector need to actually study very carefully and domesticate if possible. Where I was coming, Catherine, is that the issue of coordination is paramount. Whether you're talking about electoral institutions, security institutions, the civil society, the tech, what I would call for me the dem tech, tech firms that are actually doing democracy-related aspects of work and governance in our country. These are key aspects of advancing an electoral environment that provides, the outcome mirrors the will of citizens. So the coordination aspects will look like that, and Catherine, I touched on it slightly when we started. I look at an aspect where we will actually have what I would call the democracy for governance sort of coalition, where you have the tech firms, where you have the civil society organizations, you have the election monitoring body, you have the register of political parties, and equally bring in politicians, because we know those who propagate around election time, those who are going to propagate disinformation, we know they are going to be the politicians, and they are the key masters, and the political parties, they are the masters. Then they recruit, and then everything happens there, and then the citizens. And it is, you remember when I started, it is very deliberate. It is very strategic. It is deployed to achieve an end. And when it works for them, they have actually realized the end they wanted. And as here we are saying, the outcome does not mirror what we hoped with facts should have been. So I think we are dealing, in my opinion, with an epistemic, evolving issue. It's very social, dynamic, that one, we can't fix it. We have to continually study as it evolves, redesign interventions, and become smarter as they continue deploying. And let me just say this very recently. If you look at how we have also tried to do fact-checking for general citizens, the ordinary person, what they see things in social media. In fact, the consumption of the traditional media is really interesting. People find things in social media. Then they go to confirm the traditional media whether it is true. That's what I see. That's what I see in the general citizen. Now, what is interesting? Is that those who are purveyors, those who are actually deploying this information, they have become so smart. And I want just to give a case in point. Very recently, perhaps not very recent aside, but we had a case where, somebody came up with information letters. There was a group that was sitting in a hotel somewhere, and they were crafting to finish the deputy president. All of you know this, right? All of you know this thing was reported. This thing was reported in the mainstream. We are now learning out of serious people engaged in tech mining, that these were fake. Now look at that. Look at that. And so we are evolving. We have to be more creative. We have to preempt, what could be. And then, instead of waiting to be reactive, then perhaps try to be proactive in instances. But I also agree that we can also, at saying that we must only be proactive, the reaction aspect is also helpful, because then it helps also to decloud the information environment for citizens to make an informed decision in those electoral choices that they make.
Okay, thank you. We're coming close to we need to get your final thoughts, and then we can go into Q&A. I know we may have a few questions. Sorry, we may have a few questions coming through. Reactive or proactive? The truth or the fact? What comes first? Because I think that the whole thing, when it comes to dealing with misinformation, it's already out there. It becomes a bit of a problem trying to deal with the truth, giving people the truth after they've become sick. Giving the vaccine of truth, it's too late when you're already sick.
Yes, I worry about that every day, and it's something we have discussed before, but we sort of took the fatalistic angle, where we were like, before Jonathan Swift said that falsehoods will travel faster and go higher than the truth, this was happening. Now, what we think is that we try both sides of the coin. So there is the people who are putting out, and as Dennis has said, the people who are putting out false information, they know they'll be found out. They know that this information is false. But they are banking on, by the time you find out, the damage would have been done. That is why they circulate the fake front pages first thing in the morning. By the time the editors and the social media fellows at the media houses get into the office at around 8, 9, the falsehood has made rounds on the social media. But there is a different way in which we're trying to appeal. Now, when we look at the proactive side, so we realized that, and this is thanks to the false information that has been going around COVID-19, the COVID-19 misinformation. It was quite a lot. And now, how do you fight that? These are things where they have serious harm on people. And so there was some kind of innovative thing that the good people at Africa Check did. They decided we're going to recruit people we are calling fact ambassadors. And these ones would work within their family groups, their school groups, their professional groups. And whenever we do a fact check or whenever they see something that is potentially misleading, they send it to us because we are not in those spaces. And chances are we have fact checked it before and then they will share it. The other thing is in 2017, if you remember, during the election, there was a lot of false information, and we were like less than 10 fact checkers in Kenya. And so what we did and what we found useful is a collaboration we had with the platforms, or specifically Google, which allowed us to, they gave us something we called a schema then, where we would put our data, our fact checks behind in a set form, and then whenever somebody searched a topic around some set of facts, the fact checks would come up much higher than that. And during COVID, that improved, so we now have something on Google which we call Fact Check Explorer. So if you're searching on that, you're only going to get results of fact checks. And we're trying to find a way in which, as we approach elections, we try to push the platforms so that we get a lot of this also to help with that. Inoculation, as Catherine says, would be the best way to do this. But we also need, and this is very important for the journalists in the room or those listening to us online, some kind of collaboration because of scale. The mainstream media houses, how do we call them? The content creators. Some of them have reach. And in Kenya now, we have 75% of the population under 35. But then we have half of the voters, at least more than half of the voters who are going to vote in 2022 are under 35. So chances are that we need to capture that audience, and we need to figure out a way of accessing that young demographic and giving them the facts. So journalists are a good mainstream media, good community media, good platform to do that. But more importantly, the content creators on Instagram, the content creators on Facebook, those are the people that would be much, much better to target and to work with and to collaborate. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you, Alphonse. I'll give the last word to Roberto. And I don't want you to peer into the Kenyan crystal ball, but I want you to kind of put in our heads in terms of having the impact that you think a collaborative effort like yours would have on our on dealing with misinformation. I know you gave us a very well detailed kind of explainer, detailed response about how that had an impact in Mexico. But I just wanted you to kind of look and tell us. How long it took for you, for example, to come together so that then and maybe give us one or two tips so that after that we can go to the questions. And essentially it's just so that we walk away knowing this is the next thing I'm going to do. So when we leave this webinar here, I know my friend Dennis from NDI is going to do what, or will think he's going to do, or will imagine he's going to do one thing. I, as a journalist, will do another, and my colleague here, Alphonse, as the fact checker, will do something. What are the 1-2 things you can tell us that we can go ahead and try and think about or do so that we can essentially build together this collaboration, which I think everybody seems to be in agreement. Whether we are being proactive or whether we are being reactive, we need to come together. That's the message which is coming through. Maybe 1 or 2 tips, Roberto, and then we can go to the questions.
Yes, thank you, Catherine. I think it's important to produce proactive and reactive information. Combat this misinformation with information, as we said in the Mexican model. Initiatives such as Verificado are essential to disseminate information, but it needs information. And when it comes to elections, electoral bodies are the main source of this information. Fake news becomes viral through misinformation cascades, but information cascades can also be created, although it is you know, Catherine, this is not an easy phenomena to study. Depends on the context of each society and time, and I think there is no like a cooking recipe, but I think the Mexican model to combat disinformation with information can be adapted to Kenya's environment. Combating disinformation is a key element for our democracy to prevail, and I think two things in the next steps can we say about in order to create a initiative to contract this and misinformation to Kenya. I think it's necessary to create dissemination campaigns with a public pedagogy. It is very important to anticipate all things that you think can be a matter of the disinformation. Anticipate is it's a key process for this model, and then you need to create a structure that can develop these 5 steps that I say earlier this morning here in Mexico. Listening, the first, data analysis, verification, getting an evidence, dissemination to the media. These have not necessarily can be like a Mexican model. It can be adapted. For example, we have 38,000 of the operators in the ground, and with this force we can verify the misinformation practically in immediately. But if you have 3 or 4 person in a space, in a circumscription, maybe you can create a model adapted to respond to the disinformation in that place. I don't know. I think the most relevant is dissemination campaigns to prevent. But as Dennis says, it's important to have a quick response structure to counteract misinformation.
Thank you very much, Roberto. I just want to say thank you very much to the panelists we had. I wish we had a bit more time and we could engage much more. I want to say thank you to Lisa, and I want to appeal to all of you to try and look at some of those tools that they have on their website, as well as the data, because I think there's a lot we can learn from what the research that you guys are doing. And I also want us to kind of look at what Verificado has been able to do and see whether we can make sense for us. What I'm taking away from this conversation is that at the end of the day, we all need to work together. It doesn't matter what you're doing in terms of where we're working, whether you're coming from civil society, whether we are media, whether we are, as long as we're interested in ensuring that our democracy is safe, as long as we're interested in making sure that our audiences, whether they're the people, the community groups you're working with, the information that is being shared by Kenyans, with Kenyans, among Kenyans, is objective and factual. I think there is obviously room for all of us to sit at the same table and figure out how we can leverage our different expertise and strengths so that that continues and that we bring that strength to bear on our elections next year. I guess we don't have a lot of time in terms of putting together all this. And my only challenge to everyone who is with us and who is interested is, let's try and do something. Let's fail at it, but let's learn from it. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel. It's already been invented by Verificado or some other intervention that suits us. But let's try and do something, because we cannot have another election with the kind of madness, with the kind of misinformation and disinformation that has already cluttered the political space. Thank you very much for...
Thank you, Catherine. I know we had pressed with time, but it will be a real disservice not to allow just one question from the audience so that we can wind up. I know we've really gone past, but quickly please offer a microphone to our participant there so that they can be able to post the question. Please target your question so that you can get a very direct response from the panel, and then we close there.
My name is Anne from the Election Observation Group, and maybe I'll put it to either Alphonse or Dixon. And there's a conversation that I've not had, and the conversation is about media owners and the role they play for us to have this misinformation, disinformation. Reason being, because they are the media owners, most of them are politicians, so they control the narrative that goes on mainstream media. So you find you and I will go to social media, start sharing a story. So by the time I start my story up there, and the comments that come, by the time we end that conversation, the storyline has changed. And the issue of misinformation, disinformation, because someone comes with another angle, another angle, by the time we end, the first story that was shared up there has changed. And I'm also this firm believer that in Kenya we don't politic, we gossip. So that you find everything we talk about is just gossip, 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 and that's why we can sustain a narrative for 5 years. We finish one election to the next election cycle. Thank you.
This from the panel?
Let me just briefly. So the conversation about media owners controlling the narrative, given the prevalence of social media, the influence it has on the demographic of young people who do not depend on the mainstream media, and the ability of the let me call them digital militia to try and rig the social media content. So those three things sort of diminish the ability of media owners to control the narrative. And that is how you end up with gossip, because the media does not cover 360 degrees of the story due to the inbuilt structural limitations that come with the media ownership. So they don't cover the full story. So the holes are usually plugged in via social media. Some of it is true, some of it is not. And unfortunately, it's very difficult for people to discern or to find out what's true or what's not, given the custodians of the data are in government or in places where they don't want to release data, as Dennis mentioned earlier about the presence of Access to Information Act. But even if you apply it, you do not get the data. But I'll pass it on to him to just add more flesh to this.
Yeah, I think, Dennis, let's give an opportunity to just the two urgent ones. We have Simon and, yeah, please.
Go ahead. Thank you. My name is Kathy from Code for Africa, and we are currently preparing for election fact checking. One of the things we are doing is training. Now, I'd like to hear Dennis's thoughts on this one. Do you think our focus should be on achieving a herd immunity, where we are more concerned with training than the masses, so that by the time misinformation is coming into that community, we are saying most of them have been inoculated against false news and whatever, so even the few that come across this information are not affected? Thank you.
Yeah, and then the panelists can have one take as we close.
Okay, my name is Simon. So mine goes to Alphonse, because now the emergence of social media, yes, and social media sometimes is easy because you can do even sentiment analysis on Twitter and get what people are talking about. But now my question is, are we able to do anything on WhatsApp? Because that is where now most of the things are happening. Something is snapped, like yesterday the photo of the snake, the purported photo of a snake on the Raila Odinga Road, something like that. You see it moves through WhatsApp very fast. So what can we do about that?
Okay, so allow me, I'll pick up the question from where she left. I'm sorry, I didn't get the name very well, but Anne, thank you. So, and what I wanted to say in my take in terms of trying to respond, there are a number of areas that as a society we have to deal with. If you look at ownership of media houses, they are not immune to regulations that have been put that needs to be followed. So I think there is the element of enforcement, which I think was really discussed prior here. There is an element that laws and regulations need to be enforced. And that then comes to Communication Authority of Kenya. We have the Computer Misuse and Cybercrime Act, so that, you know, if it is used on a level playing ground. It does not matter your social status or whether you own or you don't. I think for me, that's where I come in. When I come to Kathy's question, and Kathy, thank you. I think you people are doing amazing work, you know, in terms of even, you know, building this capacity. But let me say this. The interventions around disinformation and how they affect elections is nascent. They are very experimental. None of us has a blueprint. We have to admit that that's where we are. Because in any case, it's not static. It is evolving. Every day there are new aspects to it. And if that is how we actually look at this subject, then I believe, Kathy, what you are doing, including what you think you should do, are very important to actually bring to the fore so that we see exactly how these interventions can actually help. What is our end game? Our end game is that information distortion is managed so that citizens can make decisions through an informed lens. And if that is what we are trying to do, and if you add to what Simon is saying that he will address, then we have these closed spaces where disinformation is spiraling and there is really nothing. If they are encrypted, what can happen? And if I can add to the mix, there is also the government itself engaging through the national intelligence in these things. It just gets complicated. And so for me, the parting shot is, let's do what we can do. At least that way, we can keep the environment sort of like, we can manage whatever is coming out, and we'll say, we can't say that we did do nothing. We did something, and in the words of Catherine, we actually did something, whether it worked or it did not work, but we did something. Thank you.
Question just quickly regarding WhatsApp, and how we can get the content that's going viral on WhatsApp and it's not going viral. Fortunately, over time, we've realized that a lot of what goes viral on WhatsApp ends up on open platforms. And the way we work with, say, Facebook, is they have a queue which they open up to fact checkers. So anything that has been reported as false shows up on that queue. And we also have access to one of the apps called CrowdTango. So whenever something is going viral in whichever country, all we need to do is log in and we will see what is being shared in that hour, and then we can start checking. What we would want them to do, and if I meet the platforms wherever I meet them, this is something I'm very strongly about. In Brazil, they opened up the platform in a way that what was being forwarded in bulk, and I think Lisa mentioned that, what was being forwarded in bulk, they could share that out with fact checkers and they could see it. What I would want for them to do for the Kenyan context is there are all these groups, and they can see, I believe, what is moving from one group to another, and it's being shared virally. So if that thing has been reported on Facebook and it's being shared on WhatsApp, they can alert us that this thing is going viral, and the algorithms can help rate them. And lastly, it's about what we do. So we are not in those WhatsApp spaces, and we acknowledge that limitation. So we depend a lot on our fact ambassadors to point out what they are seeing in the WhatsApp groups they have. We also depend a lot on people to report. So we set up a WhatsApp line, actually 2 WhatsApp lines. So one, it's for Kenya, where we see what is going on WhatsApp, and people forward that information to us and ask us, is this true or not? And in South Africa, we run, where our headquarters is, we run a line where we do what's crap on WhatsApp. So anything that is doing round on WhatsApp is forwarded on that line, and we check those that are likely to cause real harm in the real world. So it's, we're still piloting. We don't have the answers, but we're trying to interest the platforms to make sure that they help us, even if they anonymize the data. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for an interesting session, and I thank all my panelists for their contributions, and I look forward to tomorrow's session, where I hope we can expound on these issues further. Thank you very much for having us, Kofi Annan Foundation and the CMD. Thank you.
Thank you much, Catherine, and your panel, Alphonse, Dennis from NDI, and those joining us virtually. We really appreciate Lisa and Roberto for the wonderful conversation. This is day 1. We are done. We have some coffee right after this. Please continue conversing. You know, Nairobi traffic is quite tight now, so you better stay around to continue networking and having a dialogue. Then we meet again tomorrow early morning so that you can continue the conversation again with 2 very interesting topics, including imagining a code of conduct for the digital space. And this will be with very good panels. So thank you very much for being with us today. Alphonse, I think we're still together, and Catherine as well. And I want to really thank the panelists and the moderators today that who are with us either virtually or joining us in person, and the audience that has voluntarily as well joined us today. Please, let's look forward to another conversation tomorrow. One thing about dialogue is that it is a continuous exercise. So let us please have a longer shelf life so that you can be able to converse around these issues. Thank you very much, and do you please have a traffic-full way home. Thank you very much.